if that was the case, the doubling of expenditure of plan organization in the fifth plan would be a no-brainer, and it would also go back to the question that we just discussed, how you said Shah did not interfere really, but at that point he didn't.
Yes.
Which was really problematic.
Yes. Yeah. You're quite right. I mean, firstly, I wasn't the only one. In Iran, the plan organization was had a very high caliber quality staff, like the central bank did. But at the time of the debate, as you know, you often go through scenarios. So scenario A, B, C, so you clear the options. And they made a very strong case, not so much about dependence on oil, that was a fact of life, but how much of it to spend, and hence the size of the budget. We did have a non-oil export promotion policy, which was very active, and we supported that, and with a lot of course, subsidies to make it happen, given the exchange rate. The Shah, I think, from my perspective, had come to be very conscious of the time. And he worked within a time frame which was much shorter than what turned out to be his real expectations. And there he would prevail upon, and often in the past, and I've heard him again say this, that, you know, you told me about this in the past, the economists have told me this, and it turned out to be that I was right. So we do it this time also. So on matters of macroeconomic policy and budget priorities, he definitely chose the option that his own advisors had warned him against. But then the system was that you say your piece and then you go ahead and do what is the policy and make the best of it. The point I made too was on the central bank itself. He was much more cautious and non-interventionist in terms of a matter which he thought was should be left alone. You know, unless it came up that they had reported to him that, say, such and such company is short of credit and is so critical, especially with corporations. I've mentioned this also in the book. Some of the petrochemical companies that they had started under this plan that was not supposed to be as large, and then you start something and now you run out of money, because Iran, with all this doubling of oil income or quadrupling, ended up being borrower within 2.5 years. This is the whole momentum of fiscal policy. You create so many things, you run out of funds. And in that event, he would then encourage the central bank, now that we've started this petrochemical, we have to help them out with additional credit that they could not get out of the budget. Because then the budget had to be curtailed because the oil income wasn't there anymore.
Now, just continue. You indicated that they had all these projects, and then they ran out of funds. In a sense, they had to borrow. What if they did it? They went ahead and borrowed. So you had the oil money coming. Sometime in the future, just go and borrow and do the investment as it was planned in the revised fifth plan.
Yep.
So you don't pull back.
But if this is the problem. I mean, the pulling back. To me, is like having a headache and then you take an aspirin. The pulling back is almost impossible, and if you borrow it and you still end up with the same things. You can have all the money in the world, and if you do not have the ports, and the ports are not going to be constructed in 1 year, infrastructure is you solve the construction. I come back to your point. You finish the construction in the ports, and then you have to have the roads. You bring the roads, you construct the roads, you bring the goods to the cities, you need the warehouses, Where are you going to put them?
Refrigerator.
Then you need the refrigeration. Then you need the lorries to distribute them inside. It goes on and on. It's like a chain reaction that money cannot solve.
Alice, did you? There.
And what about the flight of the capital of the revolution? So all the capital that left the country in the aftermath, everyone that left.
Or
And
prior.
I'm sorry?
Or prior to the revolution.
And prior as well, but by the same people that now have it abroad. And so what I mean is the effect that that had on the post-revolution economy, but also today, the way that if that economy were to be channeled back to the country through the diaspora, the political situation were to change.
I can only tell you a figure that I'm familiar with, and that doesn't mean it's the whole story. The size of the what I would call the non-commercial market in Iran in 1975, 76, 77 were about 5% of the total. In other words, we had an economy, foreign exchange market of about $22 billion a year at that time. It's much, much larger here now, of course. The dollar has also changed. But basically, if the entire figures that we are talking about, what I could see is about $1 billion. We're talking about 5% of the total. Now, all the money you're talking about, I don't know how much there must have been there, but these are the official figures that I've seen. There could be other means of sending money overseas, which I'm not familiar with, but I would only be familiar with as what goes through the banking system, because these are the figures I look at, or any governor would look at.
And this is 5% in the period prior.
To me, it was no more than that.
Ali, you had the follow-up question, and then we come to Yusuf and then Dina.
The question I asked, I was trying to get the sense whether when we have oil in our country, then there is it's a revenue that it's without any trouble. So it's just coming. Isn't that a problematic thing for a functioning economy for a long run? And shouldn't that be replaced? So I'm not asking whether what percentage of it is going to be included in the budget.
I see.
Was it a priority for the government in the pre-revolutionary period to replace that with something more sustainable? Like here in Canada, the oil industry is somewhat privatized. The government gets the profit from the taxes that they pay.
Exactly.
So that's a more efficient system. So when the oil prices go down, the government doesn't lose half of its budget. Was there a plan and an effort in Iran to remove that dependency on oil and move into a more reliable system?
I think that's a very fair question. All I can tell you is that it did not materialize to anything substantive because it depends entirely on the tax system, on the indirect tax system and how efficient that is, how unscrupulous that is, how much accountable the companies are, how reliable are their books. And I don't have the figures here to tell you whether any significant increase, but one can look it up, in the non-oil income of the government went up. But overall, you can see that the dependence on oil as the government went up, because no matter what reform you would do in the tax system, would not make up for the increase in the price of oil, which is so automatic. That extra dollar generates so much revenue that no tax reform can match up with that. So often it's reduced to the question of not spending rather than dependence. And more importantly, as you know, you mentioned Canada, the whole concept of democracy, as we all know about the cliche of no taxation without representation. So it's really embedded in the entire system that you earn your income and you pay your taxes. Now, that's not the culture that I remember was prevailing in Iran.
I have a question about the investments that Iranian government had outside of Iran. how much was it, and who was in charge about that investment, and what was the result of those investments outside of Iran for our economic system?
If I'm not mistaken, and I have to refresh my memory, but it's a fair question. We had a number of components of that investment. It was not that much, by the way, in terms of the total. It was not like a sovereign fund. We didn't manage it or administer it in a very deliberative manner. It was much more an extension of politics of the time. Let me explain what I mean by that. Clearly, once the OPEC increased the price of oil 4 times, they immediately thought that it's going to affect the developing countries as well. So as you know, they started with the OPEC fund. So we had that kind of an institutional approach through an international mechanism to deal with that. In addition, you had a stream of ministers and heads of states from all places that we'd never seen before except on the map, visiting Tehran for loans. And of course, the government was very flattered by this kind of interest. So there were a number of individual loans to various countries, which again, forgive me, I cannot be accurate. But it also included some industrialized countries, like, for example, Britain, that loans were negotiated to the gas company, if I'm not mistaken, some energy companies in the United Kingdom. There was also the institutional approach of financing the World Bank and the IMF through recycling of the petrodollars. You may remember that was the, or at least not remember, but read it, that was the jargon at the time. Finally, there was also direct investment in some corporations in Germany, elsewhere. And all this was part of a pattern of, because they were channeled through the budget of the government and vis-a-vis, other claims on the government. And unfortunately, some of these, and here was the embarrassing part of it, that the commitments made under these loans, then the government could not honor it itself because they were installments. As you know, you extend a loan first for, let's say, $20 million, and you say, okay, first $5 million now, another $5 million next year. The year after it came, they couldn't pay. And I have some live examples of that.